The photograph looked ordinary at first glance. A family portrait taken in 1917, stiff with the formal stillness of its era. The father in a dark suit, the children posed obediently, and the mother seated at the center, her gaze steady and unreadable. Yet something about her unsettled those who studied the picture. It was not her expression, nor the rigid formality of her dress, but her gloved hand. The glove was heavy, thick, drawn too far up the wrist, its shape slightly unnatural. At first it seemed like a fashionable choice, but the longer one stared, the more it whispered of concealment. Why would a woman wear gloves indoors for a portrait? Why did the hand seem larger than it should have been, as if the leather were hiding not elegance but something missing? In the quiet stillness of the photograph, the glove became louder than any smile or stare. It was a question pressed into the frame, demanding to be answered. Historians who stumbled upon the image in a private collection described a strange chill, as though the photo itself carried a secret no one was meant to see. The more they tried to dismiss it, the more the glove seemed to dominate the portrait, until it was impossible to look at anything else. Was it vanity, fashion, or shame? Or was it something far more unsettling? A silence stitched into leather, a wound that history had tried to cover? That single photograph began an investigation that would peel away layers of war, loss, and social stigma, revealing truths more haunting than the glove itself. Backhand index pointing right for the full untold story. Subscribe now and share your thoughts in the comments. Only on Grave of the Shadows. The more the photograph was studied, the more the glove refused to be dismissed. It was not simply an accessory of the era, nor a symbol of class, but something that drew the eye relentlessly, overshadowing even the faces in the frame. The children's stiff posture, the father's stern expression, all of it faded in comparison to the peculiar way the glove clung to the mother's hand. At first glance, it might have seemed a matter of style. Women of the early 20th century often wore gloves as symbols of modesty and refinement. Yet there was something unsettling here. The leather was thicker than fashion dictated, stitched not with elegance but with necessity. The fingers bulged unnaturally, uneven in length, as if they were concealing something misshapen beneath. Even the wrist appeared rigid, held too straight, like a limb forced into obedience rather than resting naturally. Observers began to whisper theories. Perhaps it was vanity, a woman embarrassed by blemishes or calluses, hiding imperfection behind polished leather. But as magnifying glasses hovered over the photograph, details refused to align with such a simple answer. The thumb appeared slightly shorter, the index finger too stiff, the glove filled in a way that spoke less of elegance and more of absence. Why would a family choose to immortalize such a detail in their portrait? Why not hide the hand altogether, fold it in a lap or cover it with fabric? Instead, the glove seemed placed deliberately in view, positioned prominently in the frame, daring the eye to question it. The choice itself suggested both concealment and defiance, a secret hidden in plain sight but not erased. Historians and collectors who examined the image described the same feeling, an unease that grew stronger the longer one looked. It was as though the glove pulsed with a story untold, an unspoken wound that had been forced into silence. The photo captured not only a family moment, but a mystery sewn into leather, frozen for more than a century. Theories multiplied, but answers remained elusive. The glove was not fashion. It was not vanity. It was something else, something waiting to be uncovered. When the photograph was first presented to experts in early photography, they approached it with the caution of detectives handling delicate evidence. Under magnification, the mother's glove transformed from a mere accessory into a riddle of leather and shadow. The seams, usually smooth in gloves of the era, appeared thick, irregular, as though tailored not for beauty but for reinforcement. The fingers stretched unevenly, one pressed too flat, another puffed with unnatural bulk, as though something rigid or absent lurked beneath. A photography historian adjusted the light, tilting the print beneath a lamp. In certain angles, the glove's outline wavered oddly, not following the natural bend of knuckles but a straighter, stiffer contour. "This is no ordinary glove," he murmured. "It is covering something or compensating for it." His words carried the weight of suspicion long unspoken. The analysis deepened with technology unavailable in 1917. High-resolution scans revealed subtle impressions, indentations where flesh should have filled fabric. The thumb, shorter than expected, pressed against the leather like a remnant rather than a hole. The wrist bulged unnaturally, as though padded to disguise an abrupt ending beneath. Other specialists joined the inquiry. A fashion historian compared the glove to catalogs from the period. In her hands, magazines of 1916 and 1917 displayed delicate silk and satin gloves, slim, graceful, meant for social display. None resembled the heavy, thick garment in the photograph. This was not fashion, she concluded. It was function, concealment. Theories spread rapidly. An accident, perhaps in a factory or farm. A war injury, given the year, or an infection that required amputation. Yet every possibility raised more questions. Why pose for a family portrait with such a detail exposed? Why choose to immortalize the very thing most would hide? The glove became not a cover, but a spotlight, a mystery displayed boldly yet disguised in leather. One expert pointed out a telling detail. The child beside the mother, barely 5 years old, leaned slightly toward her, his small hand resting against her gloved wrist. The gesture was tender, unconscious, but significant. It suggested the glove was not merely tolerated. It was known, accepted, part of the family's daily life. The photographer had captured not just a moment of formality, but a fragment of truth hidden in plain sight. The experts agreed on one point. The glove was a mask, and beneath it lay a story of absence. But what kind of absence? Accident, illness, sacrifice? The photograph refused to give answers. It teased, provoked, and demanded that someone dig deeper into the world of 1917, where a mother's hidden hand could mean far more than fashion. The experts had reached the limit of what the photograph itself could reveal. To push further, the investigation turned to archives, the dusty corridors of history where small details often waited in silence. City records from 1917, newspapers yellowed with time, and parish registers offered fragments of a puzzle that stretched far beyond the frame of the portrait. The family's name, scribbled faintly on the back of the photograph, provided the first clue. It led to census documents filed in the years before the First World War. There they were, the father listed as a clerk in a shipping office, the mother noted only as housewife, her name carefully written beside the names of 3 children. Nothing unusual, at least on the surface. But by 1916, a new entry appeared. Next to the mother's name was a faint mark. Invalid. The word, in official ink, raised more questions than it answered. Local newspapers from the spring of 1916 told of a factory accident on the outskirts of town. A fire had broken out in a textile mill, injuring several workers, most of them women. Among the names of the injured appeared the mother's maiden name, confirming she had been there that night. The report was brief, a paragraph buried among war updates, but it carried chilling detail: severe injury to the right hand. Medical registers added weight to the story. One entry, barely legible, described an amputation performed hastily after infection set in. In an era before antibiotics, even small wounds could turn fatal. The glove, then, was no ornament. It was armor, leather hiding the absence of fingers, protecting not vanity but vulnerability. Historians traced the thread further into social records. Women who lost limbs in accidents were often dismissed from work, considered unemployable, sometimes even unmarriageable. In a society that prized physical wholeness as a mark of dignity, disability carried stigma sharper than the injury itself. Families concealed it to preserve reputation. Portraits, meant to present strength and stability, were carefully staged to mask imperfection. Yet in this photo, the concealment was imperfect, almost deliberate. Why would the family not hide her hand entirely? Why risk displaying it at all? Perhaps it was pride, the refusal to erase her presence from the family's story. Perhaps it was defiance, a statement that even wounded, she remained central, the anchor of the portrait. The glove both concealed and revealed, a paradox captured in leather. The archives left no record of her voice. There were no diaries, no surviving letters in her own hand. But the fragments were enough to suggest a life reshaped by one accident and hidden beneath layers of silence. The glove was no longer a mystery of fashion. It was a testament to survival, stitched into history's margins. The moment of revelation did not come from the photograph alone, nor even from the records that hinted at tragedy. It arrived when the fragments were placed together, piece by piece, until the picture formed not just an image, but a life. The glove, once mysterious, now stood as a silent confession. The leather stretched to cover a hand that was no longer whole. The evidence was overwhelming. The accident in the textile mill, the medical record of amputation, the census note marking her as invalid, all threads led to the same truth. Beneath the glove, the mother's hand was not hidden for fashion or vanity. It was hidden because it was gone. To imagine the day of the accident is to step into a world of noise and fire. The factory where she worked was filled with clattering looms, the air heavy with lint, the machines relentless. A single spark could ignite dust into flame, and that night in 1916, it did. Reports spoke of chaos, of women screaming as flames leapt from bale to bale. Some escaped with burns, others with smoke-blackened lungs. She was less fortunate. Her right hand was caught in machinery as she fled, mangled beyond saving. Infection followed, swift and merciless, and within days the doctors made their decision. The hand was amputated at the wrist. The glove she wore in the photograph was more than fabric. It was a shield, not only against the cold, but against pity, gossip, and shame. In 1917, disability was not spoken of with compassion. It was whispered about, hidden, treated as weakness. A mother missing her hand was expected to disappear from view, to stay out of photographs, to fade quietly into silence. But she had not. She sat in the center of her family portrait, gloved hand displayed, daring history to see her. The emotional weight of this discovery cannot be overstated. Each crease in the leather told of mornings when she buttoned coats one-handed, evenings when she struggled to braid her daughter's hair, nights when she reached out with an absence where her touch once had been. Her family would have lived with these moments daily, small reminders of a wound too large to name. The photograph captured not just concealment, but resilience. She had chosen to sit for the camera, not to vanish. She had chosen to mark herself in history, even if her truth had to be softened by leather. The glove became both mask and monument, a way to exist in dignity while acknowledging the wound. For modern eyes, the discovery is haunting. What once looked like a minor detail now reveals an entire world of suffering, strength, and silence. The glove hides not only her hand but the story of an era that punished the wounded more than it honored them. In her silence, she spoke volumes. About survival, about dignity, about the cost of being a woman injured in a world unprepared to see her. The big reveal was not a trick of fashion, nor an artistic flourish. It was a tragedy stitched into leather, a truth pressed into shadow, and a story carried forward by a single photograph. In 1917, the world was reshaped by war, disease, and industrial labor. Factories demanded more hands than ever before, as men left for the front and women filled the empty places at the machines. Yet, when those same women suffered accidents, their wounds carried a weight far heavier than the injury itself. Society did not see them as survivors. It saw them as diminished. The stigma of disability in the early 20th century was fierce and unforgiving. Prosthetics were crude, often nothing more than wooden molds or stiff iron devices that allowed only the illusion of wholeness. Medicine had advanced little beyond crude surgery and bandaging. For men, particularly soldiers, the loss of a limb could sometimes be rebranded as a badge of sacrifice, tragic but honorable. For women, it was rarely afforded such dignity. A missing hand was considered a flaw, one that touched not only her own reputation but the family's. It was a mark of weakness in a culture that demanded perfection. Portraits of the era reflected this reality. Families staged themselves carefully, ensuring appearances of strength, health, and prosperity. A blemish, a scar, or a visible wound was seen as a threat to the image of stability they wished to project. This is why the glove in the photograph was both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary because concealment was expected. Extraordinary because the attempt at concealment was incomplete, almost confrontational. Rather than vanish from the portrait, the mother sat at its very center, her gloved hand visible to anyone who looked closely. It was a defiance against silence, but also a reminder of the isolation she endured. Historians note that women with visible disabilities often faced whispers of being unfit wives or mothers. Employment became nearly impossible, as factories had no use for one-handed workers. Even within homes, these women carried shame imposed by a society that equated physical wholeness with virtue. The glove, then, is not just leather. It is the physical embodiment of stigma, a compromise between erasure and exposure. It allowed her to be seen without inviting scorn, to exist in the record without fully revealing what she had lost. In the context of 1917, it was both armor and prison. Understanding this makes the photograph far more than a family keepsake. It becomes a window into the unspoken struggles of women whose injuries erased them from history. And yet here, captured in shadow and light, is a refusal to be erased. The records and archives revealed the broad outlines of her story, but it was the discovery of personal papers, fragments of letters, a journal entry preserved in a trunk, that gave voice to the silence behind the glove. Words written in faded ink, some barely legible, carried an intimacy no official document could. They transformed a figure in a photograph into a living woman, struggling, enduring, refusing to vanish. One letter, addressed to her sister, spoke of the accident in hesitant strokes. The fire came so quickly. I tried to shield the others, but the machine caught me. They say it was God's will. I do not know. I only know I am changed. The tone was not self-pitying, but weary, almost defiant. She admitted her fear of how neighbors would look at her, whisper about her, perhaps even pity her. Yet in the same breath she wrote, I still have my children, and I will not let them see me ashamed. In her journal, a short passage captured the ache of daily life. This morning I tried to braid Anna's hair. My left hand fumbled, my right gone. She laughed kindly as though to comfort me and said she liked it messy. Children forgive what the world will not. The words carried both sorrow and tenderness, proof that her struggle was not hidden within the glove alone, but in every gesture of motherhood reshaped by loss. Another fragment revealed the tension she carried into public life. I keep my glove on. Even in church, they look enough already. Better they imagine fashion than deformity. Sometimes I wonder if they see through me, if the leather fools anyone at all. Here, the glove was not only a shield but a prison, a reminder that concealment came at the cost of authenticity. Historians who read these letters described them as haunting. Each sentence seemed to echo with restraint, as though she could not fully pour grief onto the page, but instead allowed it to leak in whispers. The absence of detail spoke as loudly as the words themselves. Her silence was deliberate, a choice born of pride, but also of survival in a world unwilling to accept her truth. Placed beside the photograph, these letters transformed the mystery. The glove was no longer just a curious detail. It was the visible tip of an invisible life. The diary lines, fragile and trembling, were as much a monument as the leather itself. They gave her agency. Her own voice breaking through the silence history had pressed upon her. Her family portrait, then, was not only about concealment. It was about memory. She allowed herself to be seen, not erased, even if the truth had to be softened by fabric. The glove concealed flesh, but her words revealed spirit. And together they form a legacy stronger than absence, a legacy of dignity. Decades passed, and the photograph slipped quietly through generations, tucked into drawers, moved from attic to attic, until it resurfaced in the hands of an antique collector. What once had been a private family portrait became an artifact of history, carrying whispers of resilience and silence within its frame. Curators, drawn to the image, recognized it as more than a family keepsake. It was testimony, not just of one woman's endurance, but of an era that demanded concealment and quiet strength from those least prepared to give it. When the photograph was displayed for the first time in a museum exhibition on hidden histories of the early 20th century, visitors paused in front of it longer than most other displays. At first, they admired the formality of the portrait, the neat posture, the somber fashion, the children's solemn eyes. But soon, inevitably, their gaze fell to the mother's gloved hand. It pulled at them the same way it had pulled at historians a century later. The glove refused to be overlooked, even in silence. Plaques beneath the photo explained what research had revealed: the accident, the amputation, the stigma. Yet beyond the facts, viewers responded to the humanity of it. Some lingered, whispering about family members who had also hidden injuries or endured silence. Others admitted they had never considered how dignity and shame were so tightly bound in the past. The photograph became a mirror, reflecting not just one woman's pain, but the collective weight of forgotten struggles. For the family, the rediscovery carried its own resonance. Descendants, seeing their ancestor honored in glass and light, spoke of pride. "She never disappeared," one relative said quietly. "Even when history tried to erase her, she remained." In the museum's dimly lit gallery, the portrait glowed softly, the glove still prominent, still unanswered. More than a century later, it continued to speak, not with words, but with silence that demanded to be heard. The photograph endures, long after the family it captured has vanished into history. At first glance, it is still an ordinary portrait. A father, a mother, children arranged with stiff dignity. Yet now, with knowledge unearthed, it is impossible to see it as ordinary. The glove dominates, louder than the father's stern gaze, louder than the children's solemn eyes. It is no longer a fashion choice. It is testimony. What it testifies to is not only the accident or the amputation, but the silence that followed. In 1917, silence was survival. She did not announce her pain, did not allow her portrait to become one of tragedy. Instead, she covered it with leather and faced the camera directly. The glove speaks of a wound, but it also speaks of defiance, a refusal to disappear. Looking at the photograph today, more than a century later, we see both concealment and revelation. The leather shielded her from pity, yet the photograph betrayed her secret anyway. It reminds us that history is filled with such hidden lives. The injuries unspoken, the sacrifices unnamed, the scars the world was not ready to acknowledge. And still, she endures in the frame. Her presence refuses erasure. Her silence demands recognition. The glove hides what is missing, but it cannot erase what remains. Dignity, resilience, a woman who chose to be seen even when society wished her invisible. Perhaps that is why viewers linger before the image, caught between what is concealed and what is revealed. The glove hides more than just her hand. It hides a world of pain, of stigma, of survival. And yet, in its silence, it reveals more than words ever could. Backhand index pointing right: 4 more forgotten truths drawn from history's shadows. Subscribe now and share your thoughts in the comments. Only on Grave of the Shadows.